You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you, and great to be back with another special guest today as we continue to take a look ahead to Texas Tech's 2024 football schedule. And it's great to be joined today by Alex Brink, former Washington State Cougars quarterback, now Washington State analyst as he covers the Cougars. At one time was a Houston Texan as well, so he's got a little Texas familiarity also. He may speak some Lone Star lingo, but Alex, it's great to be with you, man. Appreciate some of the time today, and obviously probably a relief sometimes to get to talking football, just like in our neck of the woods, because there's been so much else kind of swirling around your program and our program, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I appreciate you guys having me. It was, it's been obviously a tumultuous last, year or so, a little less than a year, I guess, at times. And it feels good to talk football. It's fun to get up to the spring game, a couple months ago and see the team and be around it. And, I think there's an excitement in the end, like as the cards have kind of shook out. I think people are just excited to this season, and it's gonna be new and it's gonna be different. But look, it's still ball. It's still 11 on 11. The yardage is the same, right?
That's right. And we'll talk to you about some of the conference stuff and all that as we get going. But one, what was your knowledge of how this game between these two teams got put together? Because it was not originally scheduled, and you're trying to do some former Pac-12 teams a solid by the Oregon schools, allowing them to play. And it's like, just kind of take me through your knowledge of kind of how this thing got put together.
Yeah, there's no doubt that, the entire process has been, probably to some degree a bureaucratic nightmare for people, but also a lot of relationship building and leveraging of relationships. And I know, former Washington State Athletic Director Pat Chun was deeply involved with, the process. He had a ton of connections across the country, obviously within the Pac, the old Pac-12, right? And I think this was kind of Oregon saying, hey, we'll pass along this. It'll open a slot for us to then play Oregon State eventually, somewhere along the line if we move some things around. And really, in the end, you get a great game between two ball clubs, and kudos to Texas Tech for willing to go on the road to Pullman. It's going to be a shootout. It's going to be fun. And I think that part of it's exciting. Like really high level, 30,000 foot, what I think makes college football great is, some of these kind of regional style games between teams that have strong regional followings that might be non-league in this case, right? But you get two programs that draw a lot of eyeballs and, a stadium that'll be rocking. And I think that part of it is what makes college football special.
Yeah, no doubt. And we are definitely circling that one on the calendar because of the road trip, because of the late night kick, certainly from a Central Time or Texas time perspective. And
right.
As I'm looking at your schedule, as well, which obviously is outside the box this time around compared to what fans are accustomed to. One thing Washington State fans are accustomed to is a crack at the Huskies. And Chris, I'm seeing them right after the Red Raiders. Alex, is there any chance we can get you guys to look ahead just a little bit? Don't worry about the Red Raiders. Just focus on the Huskies. Is that at all possible?
Well, why it is kind of possible is that Washington State's never played Washington this early in the season, right? Like that rivalry game is always Thanksgiving weekend. It's always in late November. That's what the Apple Cup is. And there was a lot, frankly, like a fair amount of pushback, from Washington State fans, especially as they talked about rescheduling the Apple Cup and saying, hey, we're going to move it to September, and felt, in 100 plus years of a rivalry, to make that big of a change, as I'm sure you can imagine, is very difficult for a fan base. Now, from my perspective, from a football perspective, boy, you get, we're a passing team, right? We tend to have a little less depth than everybody else. We're going to play in warmer weather earlier in the season, be at full strength. Like, that's a win in my opinion, And so there is an element where Washington State might be like, look, we get a chance at the college football playoff, from 2023, Washington Huskies and the whole thing. But I don't know. I mean, for Washington State and Jake Dickert, the head coach, does a really nice job. There's truly one game at a time because everything matters now when you're in this kind of interim Pac-2 scenario. I mean, they got to take advantage of every opportunity they have.
Alex, you mentioned passing team, and obviously Texas Tech knows something about that. We'll get to Mike Leach in a bit because we have that connection as well between the two schools. And you used the word shootout too, and my ears perked up. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen a lot of those.
Right.
Cam Ward, phenomenal quarterback last year, goes to Miami. Take us through his departure, and then also what the quarterback battle that was left in the spring. I know there was two guys kind of vying for that spot, but kind of take me through that that entire dynamic.
Sure. I think that, when you talk about Cam Ward, first of all, he is very amicable, right? Like, Cam Ward did a lot for Washington State in the 2 years he was there. He came with his offensive coordinator, former Texas Tech Red Raider Eric Morris, right? And then he leaves. Eric Morris left to go to North Texas, and then I think for Cam Ward it was kind of NFL or let's take advantage of this new landscape of NIL, and it's really hard to blame him in all honesty. And so good on him. Like, he got his opportunity at Miami. Hopefully he got paid and the checks are cleared, right, and he can go do great things there. For Washington State, it left a little bit of a void. There's no doubt about it. The backup from last year, John Mateer, got some snaps, was kind of in some Wildcat packages. Texas boy, matter of fact, and he's a good athlete. And I think he had kind of the inside track, but they got to transfer themselves from a smaller school. Zevi Eckhouse came from Bryant University, an FCS school, but was really a highly accomplished passer. Jerry Rice Award finalist. That's for the freshman of the year when he was a freshman, at Bryant. So incredibly productive. He's a senior now. Has a lot of experience. And so they kind of went at it in the spring, and Jake Dickert didn't name a starter. And I think that's by design. I think, sometimes you do that because you either want to push the incumbent a little bit, or maybe you want to see, is a guy like Zevi Eckhouse, a guy that can step in, because Ben Arbuckle, the offensive coordinator, he wants to sling it. He wants a guy that's smart and can process. I think both these guys can do it, but in the end, it's going to play out through fall camp.
I want to get back to some personnel with you in just a moment, because we got to talk about a guy who's in Lubbock now, who was one of the most exciting additions that Texas Tech had of the offseason, formerly a Washington State Cougar. But let's talk some coaching as well, because I know there are some other connections as far as the OC and Ben Arbuckle and Tex OC and Zach Kitley. Spent some time at Houston Baptist, Western Kentucky. Arbuckle actually from our relative neck of the woods, Canadian High School, West Texas A&M, spent some time just down the road in Seminole. So I'm really curious what you think about maybe some familiarity playing a part in an advantage for either team, because I guess, at least we hope, Coach Kitley's got some familiarity he could use to his advantage as well. First, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Never sweat buying tickets to your favorite events again with Gametime. It's always a breeze using the Gametime app, where you're going to find the best last-minute deals. And I love being able to scout out a view from any seat before pulling the trigger. And of course, it's always at the lowest price, guaranteed. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it begins, which means you can finish off that last beer at the tailgate at your own pace, because Gametime is the place to find last-minute seats to any event. They give you the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets, but not just fast and easy, also secure and simple to use. So right now, download the Gametime app and create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. Maybe some familiarity playing a part in an advantage for either team, because I guess, at least we hope, Coach Kitley's got some familiarity he could use to his advantage as well.
Yeah, obviously, like, as the air raid has evolved from Coach Leach and gone on with different guys in different branches, and you're starting to kind of see, this is kind of the new age, right, with the guys that were at Baptist and Western Kentucky as they spread out. And I think when you go into those matchups, it reminds me of when Coach Leach played really true air raid disciples, right? There is a familiarity, and you know how to kind of coach against it a little bit, but it's so hard to defend at times because of all the things, everybody talks about, right? The timing and the space and, the way they practice and all the stuff that makes anything tied to the air raid great. The thing I will say is that the creativity in this kind of new wave of young offensive coordinators is pretty special, and that does make it a little harder to defend, even if you know it, because that's where you start to maybe play off something that they expect you to run, or kind of a standard pass play or a standard run play or formation. All of a sudden you do something a little bit different because there's a little bit more of a freedom, I would say, in this version of offense. So I think the familiarity is more just in the preparation and knowing, hey, this is probably what we're going to see. And that helps you, but in the end, look, like, these guys are really good at what they do. And when they get out on the field, you got to be on your toes. And I think defensively for Washington State, which hopefully is a strength, but it's going to be a challenge regardless.
Let's just talk Mike Leach. What does he mean to the folks there in Pullman? I mean, we know what he meant to the folks in Lubbock for basically a decade, and kind of gave you an identity here and all those things. And they're still kind of playing off of that at some level. What does he mean to the folks in Pullman? And I just think it's kind of fascinating because you mentioned Eric Morris. We're talking Zach Kitley and Ben Arbuck and all these kind of things, all kind of tie back to Mike in some way.
Yeah. I mean, he's just a special man, right? Not just football coach, but, someone that could, he really, to your point, he kind of commanded a presence and created an identity and a culture around a school, and you saw him do it a couple different times, and I think was on his way at Mississippi State to doing the same thing. And it was very similar, between what he did at Tech and what he did at Washington State, which is, galvanize the fan base around a football team that, won and won in big moments and was a kind of a giant beater at times. Obviously did it in a different way, but in those communities, I think was a really endearing way to do it. And it brought you on a national, it put you on a national pedestal. And that's really what it did for Washington State because of what he had previously done at Texas Tech, put Washington State on the map, and it really reinvigorated Washington State football because it was, there were some dark times, right? Like I followed Mike Price, who took Washington State to 2 Rose Bowls and, really had things humming. And during my tenure under Bill Dobo, we were a good football team. We were fine. We didn't win like Washington State was used to. And then after that, after Coach Dobo got fired after my year, there's some struggles in Pullman. And so when Bill Moose, the former athletic director, had the vision to go track down Mike Leach in the Florida Keys and go get him and bring him back out, right? I thought that for Washington State fans gave it life. And then the community rallied behind it. And so, think about game day in Pullman playing Washington State, Oregon, Gardner Minshew playing quarter. I mean, like, that doesn't happen without Mike Leach, right? And so, Washington State fans are forever grateful. Obviously, like I said, just an incredible human being and someone we'll never forget.
While we're on the subject of the fans, I'm wondering what you feel about kind of gauging the temperature of the fans after you go through a big change like what they did. And we have some familiarity with this with Texas Tech as well. I wonder if there's some type of anger that results in motivation and you're really fired up to get back out there. And at the same time, you're thinking about the schedule that's coming up. Again, much like Texas Tech, there's no longer a UT, there's no longer an OU. And you wonder about, okay, should the expectations, really rise? So where do you think the fan base is just temperature wise? And where do you think they are as far as expectations for this upcoming season?
Well, I think temperature-wise, they're frustrated. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you feel like you got left behind. And kudos to the administration at Washington State, kind of able to manage it to some degree. And by all rights, Washington State and Oregon State, you talk about the Pac-2, may be in a better spot than some of their former, compatriots in the Pac-12 who were traveling to the East Coast in the ACC to play, these or traveling to Rutgers in November. Like, look, like that, and taking half shares off some of these leagues. Like, that's not necessarily a better situation, right, than what Washington State and Oregon State find themselves in, where they're cash rich. off of the lawsuits and have a flexibility to potentially join some new leagues if the ACC, or excuse me, when the ACC blows up, and things like that. And so, I think there's frustration though that, for all that Washington State has done, kind of tying back to the Mike Leach conversation, that we weren't a part of the conversation, but here we are. And in that regard, I do think there's some expectations, for this team to win. I think the fan base is a little hesitant to say, hey, like, this is a schedule we can go really win and get into the 12. But there is a reality where if Washington State wants to continue to compete on a national level and be included in these conversations and be considered a quote unquote Power 4 team, then they do have to win. And that's the thing, is you look at the schedule and games like Texas Tech in Pullman, games like Washington in September at a neutral, quote unquote neutral site, Lumen Field, and then playing on the road at Boise State and Fresno State and Oregon State. You got to take advantage. And that's just the reality of it. And if you don't win, even more so now than ever in college football, if you don't win in Washington State scenario, then it's kind of all for naught.
Alex, a two-part question. What did Texas Tech get in Josh Kelly? And then my follow-up would be, who would be Washington State's now big-time skill guy that they may lean on, whether it be in the backfield or at wideout?
Sure. I mean, I think in Josh Kelly, you get a max competitor. He came in from Fresno last year. He'd had a couple decent seasons, a little bit marred by injury, showed some big play ability. He stayed healthy all year at Washington State, showed that big play ability. He can go high point the football. I think he's got great top end speed. I think he's special. I mean, it's a great pickup for Tech. Obviously a tough loss for Washington State, but in the nature of, the world we live in these days, it's kind of part of the process, right? And Washington State was able to retain another transfer from last year, Kyle Williams, who came in from UNLV, who's very similar to Josh Kelly from a production standpoint, a player standpoint. And it was almost kind of like, you're probably not going to keep two of them, so let's try and keep one of them. And once Josh went in the portal, then they really went all in to keep Kyle Williams. So Kyle Williams will be the guy, that you'll hear the most about going into this game. He's had a good spring, a good off season. He can do a little bit of everything. So I would look for him to kind of be the one as you head into that game that, hey, he'll have the big week 1 game probably against Portland State, and then you'll be talking about him leading into week 2.
I'm curious about Clay McGuire, who now is back in West Texas. We've got historical familiarity with him, obviously, but it's been a while since he was a part of the program. So what was the view there as far as those offensive lines, the good, the bad, and what some expectations you feel like could or should be back in Lubbock? I'm curious about Clay McGuire, who now is back in West Texas. We've got historical familiarity with him, obviously, but it's been a while since he was a part of the program. So what was the view there as far as those offensive lines, the good, the bad, and what some expectations you feel like could or should be back in Lubbock?
Well, I think Clay McGuire is a fantastic coach. I've been around him on 2 stints, right? First stint at Washington State, and then the second time around. And, the second time around, he was on his way to doing it, and I watched him do it the first time around. He recruits really well. He's got a very clear blueprint of who and what he wants as an offensive lineman and how to develop them. In this day and age, especially at places like Washington State, Texas Tech, you're not always going to get the ready-made player, right, at the offensive line position. And so you got to know how to recruit that player and then how to get them in the weight room and how to develop them and teach the skills and those sort of things. And I think Clay does that really well. Again, he did it the first time around at Washington State. You have multiple NFL draft picks, a really highly sought after offensive line as a group. And he came in the second time around and things were pretty depleted. He started to kind of work his way back in getting those guys ready. And obviously we didn't get to see the fruits of that labor. But I do think that that's probably his best quality, is being able to identify talent and then develop that talent in the room.
Yeah, and you guys replace him with a former Red Raider offensive lineman that's got some of those same Western Kentucky and Houston Baptist ties, and Jared Castor.
Sure.
So yeah, interesting timing for really, I guess, both guys, in that you're just pre-spring and you're not going to get a full off season to kind of retool or work on an offensive line. So interesting spot that Jared Castor gets put in.
it's one of the harder parts. I think about the way the coaching cycles sometimes play out is, if you aren't pulling the trigger right around the end of the season, which is always a tough, like assistants kind of feel like they never get that opportunity, right? Head coaches get the opportunity right at the end of the season. They make the big changes and then they're hiring all their staff. And if it doesn't happen fast for you and you kind of do come in a little bit, kind of later and you're playing catch up a little bit. And I think the advantage for Coach Castor is that, he gets really the whole group back. And so he's got guys that have been in the trenches, quote unquote, literally, and been under the fire, and he's not going to have to replace necessarily new guys. And so I think there's value in that. Now that group needs to get better. And so I think that's obviously where his challenge is going to lie, but at least he knows who the guys are, all the way back through the 2 deep for the most part. And so there is an advantage in that.
I'm wondering, big picture wise, as we step kind of away from this matchup or the guys involved, you've got this Pac-2 timeline for a period of time, but what's your sense and what do you hear on the ground there as far as, Washington State hopes for the future? I think we're on the same page when it seems like the ACC's future based on conversations we have on this show and what you've already said here today. But what's the conversation like? What are Washington State fans wanting to see happen? What do you think is realistically a possibility out there?
I mean, you know as well as I do that it's changing by the minute. It feels like. I mean, I think inevitably the ACC, is going to, fall apart, or however you want to describe it, right? Like Clemson and Florida State are going to leave, if not some more. Probably 4 teams out of there at least, at max. And then from there, you're trying to figure out how that plays out, and ultimately how Washington State fits into that puzzle, right? There is a little bit of that Big 12 conversation. Does Brett Yormark want to get bigger? Like that's a possibility, and I've always said and believed that Washington State and Oregon State are, although they're West Coast schools, they are as Big 12 as it gets when it comes to the, kind of the identity of those schools and fan bases and teams. So there might be an opportunity there. I think the more realistic option is that, as the ACC kind of unwinds, Stanford and Cal are going to come back to the West Coast. There's no doubt about it. They can't afford to, they couldn't afford to begin with to do what they're doing now. So I think they get to walk it back a little bit. And then maybe you get SMU in that same conversation. And so you got 5 teams, plus kind of some of those top end, hopefully those top end Mountain West schools as the end of the Mountain West rights deal, comes up here. You can kind of pick some of those teams and maybe rebuild, whatever you call it, right? It's Pac, Pac West, Pac 10, I don't know, whatever. And then you have that, and you probably pair it with what's left of the ACC, the private schools in the ACC, and you play some really good, some really good basketball and some pretty darn good football too. And you have kind of a bi-coastal agreement, and I think that's something that can sell. I think people will watch it. And look, football is, as we all know, right, is the king, right? It's the NFL, and then keep working your way down. In the end, people want more football. So, programs aren't going away. They're going to find a place to play, and things get repriced a little bit, maybe from a media rights standpoint. But, I know, in my heart of hearts that Washington State and Oregon State are going to end up in a conference and end up somewhere playing football. And I think it's probably going to land somewhere in that second scenario that I mentioned.
All right, Alex, last thing for me. I'll be coming up to Pullman here in a few months with the Red Raiders. Tell our listeners, for those that may be going, and myself, where do I need to eat? And is there something I need to see when I'm in Pullman on the trip up to the Pacific Northwest?
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things. Pullman, I mean, it's not going to be like, it's beautiful. It's beautiful country. Like, get out and go for a drive. And, it's different, right? Like, I've driven through West Texas on my way from Oregon to Houston, Texas. So, like, it's a different vibe. It's country, but you got these rolling wheat fields, right? And it's kind of crazy when you're out driving in them. You're thinking about this, like, this is farmland? How's a combine drive on the side of that hill, right? And so I will, for folks that are from West Texas, I think they will appreciate that type of farmland and what's happening there, especially that time of year, So I would strongly recommend getting out and going for a drive. There's plenty of great places in town, some classics. You got to go to Cella's and get a calzone, some decent, some good Italian food. Decent meal at the Black Cypress is really good. And then if you got to get a beer, you got to go to 2 places. You got to go to the Cougar. That's on campus. That's the place to, like, it's you go in there and it's college dive bar through and through, and it's the best. or you go downtown to a place called My Office, which you get the joke, right? I'm going to my office, but I'm not really going to my office, right? I'm going to go get a beer. So, yeah, those are some places to check out for sure.
Oh, man. Perfect. Writing those down, man. I appreciate it.
You just try to keep Chris out of there. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you and me both.
Right. Man, enjoyed the conversation and some of the insight. Can't wait for the matchup to come about early in the year. Will be quite the test for both as they try to get off to a good start in 2024. But Alex, appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sure. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Thanks,
He's Alex Brink. You can find him on Twitter at AlexBrink10. And of course, he's on Cougar Football Calls as a radio analyst there as well. So for Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Appreciate you guys being out there. Get subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. And we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.